And we back with another reflection on the Daily Vedantic. Today's reflection is on wise action. Not just action, not just a pursuit of wisdom, but wise action. That is the heart of one of the canonical texts of Vedanta, which is the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord, God's song. It is a nice little sidebar. Little factoid there is, this is not a song, a hymn for the Lord, like I was used to growing up in the pews at church. This is the other way around. This is the other way around. This dialogue between a warrior prince and his charioteer, who's not just his charioteer, is the symbolic embodiment of God, singing his song, so to speak. It is not an actual song as we think about it, but it is line by line, verse by verse, of pure wisdom imparted from this charioteer to this warrior prince that's having this epic breakdown, meltdown, right in the middle of this civil war, the biggest battle of this civil war that's been in the making for 13 years. And the warrior prince, Arjuna, is so stoked for this war for 13 years leading up to it. So jacked up for this battle. And then, as both sides come to the battlefield and he sees just how undermanned his side is. This battle that he quote unquote wanted for so long. Now it's before him. And he asks Krishna, his charioteer, to take him to the middle of the battlefield to survey both sides. Quote unquote to survey both sides, but he actually is just freaking out. He wants to get away from his side without retreating. So he goes to the middle of the battlefield, looks even closer at just how undermatched his side is, and he has an absolute meltdown. Luckily, Krishna isn't just his charioteer, but like I said, the symbolic embodiment of God. And who's better to advise you than a symbolic embodiment of God that knows everything, that can guide you through anything? It's one hell of a premise for a spiritual text. I've never heard of a spiritual text based around, and sermon of such wisdom based around a massive battle like this. But certainly speaks to me when I've got some type of external conflict, but it speaks to me even more when I realize that we all have a battle that's raging within our hearts between what we want to do and what we ought to do, between the pleasant and the good, between selfishness and service, between desire and surrender. That is a war that rages within us every day. And if you think there is no war, there's no conflict. It's so easy. Every decision I make is so simple. It might be because, well, after a while, when we run from the battle for so long, we forget that there is a battlefield where the battle is raging. We're so far from it, so scared from any conflict. Sometimes we forget there's a higher order of things, a truth to fight for, versus just chilling in the lazy river of selfish pursuits and self-oriented ideals. And within this text, within this battle, there is this paradoxical dynamic where the charioteer, the advisor of all advisors, says at one point, wisdom and knowledge is the highest pursuit. And then in another point says action is the highest pursuit. Then goes back and says, well, wisdom and knowledge is the supreme, the superior pursuit. And then back to action is the superior pursuit. To say it another way, on one hand, you seemingly have a renunciation of action and a pursuit of knowledge of God, knowledge of self. And on the other hand, you have this praise towards the performance of action, surrendering into our duty and action of service. So what is the reconciliation between these two? Well, like I said, the warrior prince just flat out asks this in chapter 5 of the Gita. He's like, dude, you've praised both of these. Knowledge as the highest path, and then you say action is the highest path. Just tell me, what is the one? I identify with this question so much because it is so human of us. I could hear a mentor of mine, this philosopher, cognitive scientist, psychologist, John Vervaeken, I could hear his voice in my head saying that most questions are of metabolic interest, not out of a pursuit of wisdom. And I had him explain, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, we ask for, what's your favorite color? What's the one thing you need to do to build your business? What is the one parenting trick that will raise good kids? It's more important than all others. That pursuit is a metabolic pursuit, meaning we want to conserve energy. We're not looking to do it right. We're not looking to do it the best we possibly can. We're just looking to conserve energy and be efficient. So we say, well, what's the one thing? What's the greatest commandment of all? And Christ says, love God with all your heart. And then he says, and then there's a second great commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbor, the real translation would be more like those in need. Love those in need as yourself. Refuses to give one. Love God and love those in need. Similarly, Krishna is like, dude, I'm not going to give you just one. You need to pursue both. Knowledge, wisdom, and action. You need both. And a great way of thinking about why both are important is to get to New York City from LAX. I need to take an Uber to the airport and then a flight to New York City. Which is most important? Well, I'm not going to get to New York without both of these. There isn't one that's more important than the other. It's very easy for me to make a case that, well, the Uber is the most important because that's the first mile. Without that, I would never get close enough to the plane to get on it. And then obviously, well, the plane is the most important because it goes the most distance. But one is worthless without the other. Hence, wise action is the reconciliation. Not seeking efficiency. Not seeking efficiency and performing action without wisdom. And just action, okay. Just do things. And then you'll get close to God. It's not pursuing just wisdom. Sitting cross-legged, isolated, in stillness, away from the world, away from service, usefulness, duty, obligation to those around you. That's actually what Arjuna tries to do in the second chapter of the Gita, where he's like, dude, we should not be doing this. Krishna, these are our kith and kin. These are our cousins, our teachers on the other side of this civil war. We should not be doing this. We should go to the forest and study philosophy. And Krishna, the great philosopher, sage, enlightened soul, looks at him and he's like, dude, what are you talking about? That is not what we should do. You had your chance to avoid this battle years ago, weeks ago. But now the battle is here and you have to fight it. You have to fight for truth instead of taking what is called the spiritual bypass of saying, well, I'm going to pursue peace instead of fighting for truth, and I'm going to go retire to the forest. Wise action. This is so helpful in our practical lives whenever we feel the pull to the spiritual bypass instead of hitting conflict head on because it's fighting for truth. It's also so helpful whenever we're just fighting for ourselves, not fighting for truth. In a battle, in the midst of action, performing action for the ego, for ourselves, and not in the pursuit of truth. It's not just action, it's wise action. It's not just wisdom, it's wise action. It's the Uber and the airplane. It's both. It is the gospel of both. That is not one commandment, it's two. And it is of metabolic interest for us to distill it down to one. When really, our lives are filled with examples where nature is both. It's not all right legs. You can't walk with one leg. You need two. Life would be really hard with just one hand. Left brain, right brain. 2 spouses helping raise kids. There is co-founders and startups being so much more powerful than just solo founders trying to do it themselves. I know this from experience over the last 20,000 hours of building startups, of investing in 100+ startups and seeing that play out over and over and over again. That life is rarely just one, and a life well lived is not just one of action and activity. Confusing moving our feet back and forth and activity with achievement. And it's also not just sitting idly trying to pursue wisdom without action in life to show us where we still have work to do. That is one of the greatest aspects about action, is that we might think we've mastered ourselves or mastered a subject, and then we have to apply that knowledge. You think you're spiritually evolved, and then you're at the grocery store with a 2-year-old melting down and a 7-year-old asking for everything in the aisles and a 4-year-old hitting the 7-year-old, and you really get to see how much work is still required to master ourselves when you pair wisdom with action, and you really get to see how powerful and useful wisdom is when you pair action in your community, with your coworkers, with your family, when you pair that with wisdom. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.